And now, Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience. With your host and special guest, Joan de la Fleur!
Why, hello, darlings. Hello, it is I, Joan de la Fleur, and I'm so very excited to be here with you today. In fact, I'm thankful and grateful to be here with you today. And do you know why, darlings? Do you know why? Because this is my very first ever Thanksgiving episode on Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience. Yes, darlings. Now, a little bit of business before I get into my wonderful show that I have planned for you all. First of all, you very well may hear some noises during this podcast. It is Thanksgiving Eve, and there has been a party here delivered by the living occupants of the house. So you may hear some of the mice stirring above, or the cat upstairs jumping and jumping and jumping. You may hear some of the late night revelers who have fallen asleep to the sound of cartoons in the other room. Well, there's nothing I can do about the fact that the late night revelries went on and on and on, and it took a long time for me to be able to get to this podcast, but here we are, darling. So please do forgive any sound gaffes, as I'm simply a phantasma who can do very little about it. Anyhow, on to Thanksgiving, on to what I would like to offer to you. A wonderful episode that you listen to while you're basting your turkeys, stuffed with oysters and creamed onions and... What was that? What was that you say? Oh, you modern folks no longer use stuffed oysters and creamed onions for your turkeys? Why, what has this world come to? Is this even America? Next you'll tell me you don't use butter molds. Well, I'm sure you do. But speaking of molds, I did want to offer a wonderful recipe in a section of Cooking with Joan. Now, this is a wonderful dish that I used to serve regularly at dinner parties, and I think it would just be a smash at any Thanksgiving dinner or supper or party or whatever you happen to be doing for your day of gratitude and whatever else you might do on Thanksgiving Day. Now, for us, of course, in the 1940s, it was drink. Anyhow, this is called Under the Sea. What you do is you need a bundt cake pan with the bottom. And you're going to saute a certain amount of ground beef, and you're going to spread that towards the bottom, where actually it would be ultimately it would be the top, but you're just going to put it on the bottom of a plate, the serving dish itself, okay? And then you're going to take your bundt cake mold, and you're going to put in lime green jello. Now that is the closest color we can get to the color of the sea, darlings, and you're going to set it in the refrigerator in the ice box so that you might let it start to set. Now once it is about 70% set, then you're going to take it out of the ice box, and you're going to take some shrimp that you probably boiled, and you're going to, in each slice, you know how bundt cake is, little ridges to demarcate slices, where there's going to be each slice, you're going to flip that little shrimp right into that little section of the bundt pan. You're going to put it all back into the refrigerator and let it completely gelée. And then at the very end, once it's completely geléed, you will remove the lime green jello mold with the shrimp inside of it, and you will plop it the right way so that the round part is on top over that sandy bottom of the sea, which is your ground beef on the platter, and you have a wonderful dish, a wonderful platter that everyone in your household will enjoy, unless of course they're definitely allergic to shrimp, in which case you should also have a supply of EpiPens, something we didn't have in the 1940s at hand, and so there were several incidents during several parties of mine. Yes, it's true. Anyhow, I'll tell you what though, it's a simply smashing dish, darling, simply smashing. And if you younger generations don't rush right out and create that wonderful dish for your Thanksgiving parties, well then, I really don't know what that says about the state of taste or art in this country at this time, darlings. I simply don't. Now, darlings, I thought something wonderfully fun to do for you for this Thanksgiving episode would tell you the story of my worst Thanksgiving ever. At the time, I was in a relationship. Well, understand that I use the word relationship as a sort of catch-all. There are many different kinds of relationships in Hollywood in the 40s. There were marriages, affairs, romances, flings, business arrangements, one-night flings, two-night flings, three-night flings. Anyhow, you get the picture. Drinking body flings. And I mean body with a B-A-W, but also I suppose we were flinging bodies B-O-D. Anyhow, darlings. At the time, I was in a relationship with a producer named Archie. Now, Archie and I had a lot in common. We loved martinis, and we both wanted to make a series of hard-boiled Pinkerton lady femme fatale films starring me as the detective, and make a lot of money off of those movies. They were starting to become very popular, and we would have been the first, well, among the first, not the very first, but among the first to have a woman as the Pinkerton person, as the detective, a sort of tough as nails, sort of glamour diva. I mean, it was just simply typecasting, really. All they had to do was show up and breathe, really, and the whole film would have been a smash. Now, anyhow, Archie and I, we would sometimes drink a little too much and start to realize some of the differences between us, which were largely philosophical. It's true. For example, I was a fan of Rousseau, and he was a fan of Hobbes. I was a fan of Kant, and he was a fan of Hume. I really enjoyed Kierkegaard with a dash of Nietzsche for good measure, whereas Archie was a fan of Mayer. Louis B. Mayer. Oh, forgive my little Hollywood philosophy joke, darlings, forgive it. Anyhow, Thanksgiving Eve, we were drinking quite a bit, tipping a lot back, and we started to engage in a sport known as insulting each other for fun, something drunks can be known to do, especially if they're drunks of a certain age, like Archie, of course. At first, I really did think it was just all in good fun, darlings. You know, insulting each other for sport can be revealing and enjoyable, and a sort of one-upmanship and a bit of verbal jousting that really can sort of help you with your acting and your improvisation. Anyhow, I realized at one point I must have taken things a bit too far, because Archie got very angry and he said, "Why, you're nothing but a drunken old broad." Well, you can see why I would be thoroughly insulted, because of course only two of those things were true. He said three. Drunken old broad. I'll leave it to you to understand which one of those things was false. Hint, old. Anyhow, so I said something true back, which was that he was just a chrome dome. It was funny coming from a chrome dome. Now, darlings, back in the 40s, a chrome dome was a bald man. And for the record, I'm a fan of a bald man. I'm a fan of balding men in general, especially if they own it. Think of all the handsome and sexy bald men of your generations. For example, there's that wonderful actor. He's on Jack Reacher and House of Cards. I just can't remember his name at the moment, but he's incredibly sexy, darlings. He's tough and strong and also vulnerable with women. Then there's Ed Harris. We could say the same thing. Or Jason Statham. Tough, strong, sexy, vulnerable with women. Wonderful quality. So I have no problem with the bald men, and I've always found them attractive. Of course, when you start dating men in their 40s, when you're at the age of 13, you do sort of probably develop a little bit of a habit. Anyhow, darlings, he was thoroughly insulted because that was a sensitive point for him. But what was he to do? So he decided to insult me back. He said if I wasn't careful, my acting career would go belly up. Ha! Well, little did he know what I would be doing all these decades later to revive my acting and my notoriety via this podcast. Well, everyone's got to start somewhere, darlings, and if you're starting over again, everyone's got to start over again somewhere, I suppose. But anyhow, I wasn't going to let that one pass, so I busted his chops. I said that was a crummy thing to say, and that he was going to make me flip my wig. Anyhow, stop this gobbledygook, you dumb dame, he said, or I'll give you a knuckle sandwich. Well, that was a joke and a half, and we both knew it, because I had a good 10 pounds on him, and I'm not exactly a large woman. He was just one of those scrawny producer types. Became a producer because he didn't have enough meat on his bones to become an actor. Anyhow, so I said, you're a real pain in the neck. And you know what? All of this time, and you've been ragging on me. I thought I was falling in love, and it turns out I was just whistling Dixie. Well, why don't you get out and scram then, he said, and take your hairbrush with you. And he handed me a hairbrush. Now, the hairbrush was not mine. So this stopped me dead in my tracks, and I said, well, now whose hairbrush is this? I suddenly go very sober, darlings, very sober, stone cold sober. Because when somebody's about to cross me, trust me, all of that drunkenness goes away, and I become as clear as ice and as cold as ice, and my heart goes freezing cold, and you don't want to see that, Joan de la Fleur. I assure you, you do not. So I looked him straight in the eye, and I fixed my gaze upon his scrawny little bones, and I said, Archie, whose hairbrush is that? And he looked away. Well, darlings, when a man looks away, you can be sure there's been some funny business going on. That wasn't part of our arrangement. It would have been one thing if we'd had an arrangement, but we did not. Well, we got into a lot of fighting, a considerable amount of squabbling, and eventually we passed out. The next day was Thanksgiving, and he said, maybe you'd better not come. And I said, absolutely, I'm coming. Now, the reason I was going, darlings, really, is because I knew there was going to be a lot of producers and directors at this particular Thanksgiving party, and I wasn't about to miss out on that networking. I planned to go with him and ditch him as soon as I got there. But do you know what happened? Do you know what happened, darlings? Well, we got to the party, and imagine my surprise when he had already replaced me. There was a woman sitting in my place. She smiled at me. She said, oh, Miss de la Fleur, I'm such a fan. My name is Lauren Laurent. I'm a female director. And I said, what on earth is happening? I turned to Archie, and he had vamoosed. He was gone. And I turned back to Ms. Laurent, and I said, I'm sorry, there's been some sort of mistake. And she said, oh, I understand. It's that Archie. Do you know, we've been on again, off again for decades, and he does this all the time. He picks up some new wonderful, beautiful movie star just to make me jealous, and then he causes a fight with her so that he can spend the holidays with me. It's a whole thing. And I said, well, why do you put up with that, darling? Why? And she said, I don't know. I guess I love him in my heart of hearts. And I said, well, I understand. He's really kind of a fun guy, although you should know, he is a fan of Hume. He is. And she said, oh, goodness, I didn't know that. Well, we certainly do have some strong philosophical differences. And I said, really? She said, yes, absolutely. I'm really more of a Kant person. I said, well, so am I. And we got to laughing and chatting, and do you know, together we decided that it would be a wonderful idea if she and I made the series of Pinkerton Lady Pictures. And she gave me a ride home, and we discussed our pictures, and we decided to start together. And do you know, we made a long list of movies together, some of which are lost to time, but I have here, on my ghostly paper, darlings, a list of the films Ms. Laurent and I made together, including some hits you may have seen yourself. Payback with Lipstick, Female Fury, X Marks the Spot, Revenge Served Hot, Vixens of Vengeance, Mistresses of Mischief. That was one of my favorites. Oh no, this one was my favorite, perhaps, of them all. The Wrath of the Wronged Wife. That was a very good one, darlings. And of course, the very last film in our series of hard-nosed femme fatale Pinkerton Lady movies, Hearts Broken, Eggs Fried, which is really rather ahead of its time because it was not only a detective story, but sort of a cooking show. Wasn't entirely successful compared to some of the others. But we were trying something new, darlings. We're trying something new.
Act 2.
Now, darlings, as the phantasma of an older white woman, I understand a thing or two about the sensitivity about Thanksgiving Day and colonizers. Now, also, I would like for you all to know I have actually met a number of these colonizers. Indeed, as a spirit walking the earth, I've actually met the spirits of conquistadors and missionaries and, well, I do mean missionary in multiple ways. Found that one out the hard way, darlings. Settlers from Russia, China, the East Coast, and from Mexico, California. See, there are spirits from all of these groups of people still walking the streets of Los Angeles, very confused as to what's going on here. But they're horny old bastards, I'll tell you that, and they've tried a lot of lines on me, and I thought it would be fun if I would tell you about some of the lines they've used on me, and which have been somewhat successful and which have failed miserably, darlings. Doesn't that sound like fun? Oh, let's see now. I have notes here. The very first ever conquistador that ever hit on me was someone named Pedro. Now, Pedro was some sort of military conquistador back in his day, yes, and he was working with a missionary named Serra. Well, que Serra. He still loves to come around time and again. Pedro, not Sarah. Pedro likes to come around once in a while and give me some sort of hogwash line like, "My lady, even after 450 years, my sword still rises for you." Darlings, trust me when I say it's more of a pocket knife. Well, anyhow, then there's Cabrillo. Now, Cabrillo still thinks California is an island. But we must forgive him. After all, he's not like the modern-day flat earthers who have the benefit of Hubble telescopes and getting on an airplane and seeing the curve of the horizon. Really, I can't believe education was better in my day, and I grew up during the Depression. Anyhow, kids. Now, Cabrillo usually starts off beautifully, saying things like, "Oh, in the realm of eternal echoes, your presence stands out like jewels on a starry night." Yes, he's beautiful. But then he devolves quickly, saying things like, "Now, show me your senos." Darlings, you know what senos are? Now, you get the picture. Oh, yes, I'm just remembering this one charming apparition. Very handsome Chinese immigrant, and he told me some beautiful things like, "My sweet, like a ship sailing through the seas of eternity, let us embark on a spiritual adventure." Oh, simply beautiful, poetic words, but he always ended with things like, "And you cook, right?" No, of course not, darlings. I'm a movie star. That whole Cooking with Joan segment is, of course, how you instruct your maid or your housekeeper or your chef, Pierre. Do you think I made that Jell-O mold? No, I simply told my chef to make it, darlings, of course. Anyhow, next there was Ivan. Now, Ivan was Russian, a Russian fur trader. He was really, really very old. Not as old as Pedro and Cabrillo, but he was really an older spirit, darling. So he was the sort of lumberjack of an old-fashioned Russian man. Ooh, yes. Ooh. Getting a little hot in here, isn't it? Getting a little hot in here, darling. Yes. And he would say things, very direct things, "My dear, in the afterlife, there's no need for modesty. Shall we make our own special fireworks and set this place ablaze?" Well, that sounded really rather intriguing until I learned that was actually how he died, darlings. He died in a forest fire that he had accidentally set. Accidentally. Very sad. Anyhow, the Russians really did always have their sort of literary way with words, didn't they, darlings? But now let me tell you, even non-colonialists can have terrible pickup lines. For example, there was this one frat boy, and he used to tell me that the afterlife was an orgy that never stopped. Well, darlings, that may be true, but I certainly am not going to share my ectoplasm with somebody who still has pimples and doesn't even understand some of the finer points of lovemaking for a woman, which I also learned the hard way. Anyhow, look, darlings, I came of age pre-code, so I'm not a prude, but I must insist upon some suave on the part of a romance with a suitor of some sort. So if you're a suave suitor and a producer, a director, a screenwriter, I suppose I could level myself to screenwriter, but if you've got a part for Ms. Joan de la Fleur, please do email me at joandelafleur@yahoo.com, darlings, and we can meet and see what sparks fly, creative or otherwise. Now, darlings, as a spirit, I have to tell you, the question is always the same: to date or not to date? That is the question.
Act 3.
Act 3, darlings. We've come to Act 3 in this wonderful episode. Don't you enjoy this episode so very much, darlings? Please do give me a 5-star rating on whatever podcast service you're using, and tell all your friends to subscribe to Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience, and we can keep this party going into 2024, perhaps. Now, darlings, I thought that for Act 3, I would give you my gratitude list, my top 10 things I'm grateful for as a spirit in the afterlife. Number 10 is, I have it written down here, you see. Number 10 is my spectral script club. Yes, darlings, this is ever so much fun. It's much like a book club. Snooze. Oh no, there are books I liked, mostly books I wrote, are the books I enjoyed the most, but it's like a book club, but it's a script club. A group of spirits get together and we read through scripts. I, of course, always play the ingenue for the obvious reason. Now, number 9 is social media. There's an intriguing magic that can happen as a spirit, which is that you, as a spirit, can comment on people's TikTok videos. I simply love to comment and tell them everything they've gotten wrong about the golden age of Hollywood, because people really do get an awful lot wrong about Hollywood, darlings, in general, let alone Hollywood in the golden age. It all looks so glamorous, but it's all sets made of cardboard. You know that, don't you, darlings? You know, just as reality shows aren't really real. Why else would my favorite reality show star, Bethany Frankel, you know, I did one of her monologues on a previous episode of this show, and if you haven't seen it, you simply must run out and go listen to it immediately after listening to this episode or watching this episode, because it is really an Oscar-winning performance on the part of me as Bethany from The Real Housewives of New York. Now, if it was really, truly reality, why would Bethany be insisting on a union for reality performers? Think about that. Anyhow, number 8 is glamour. Oh, I'm so grateful for glamour. No, certainly I'm not grateful for grammar. I'm neither gleeful for grammar, nor even giving a hoot about grammar, darlings. I allow the scriptwriters to do that for me. No, I'm grateful for glamour. Glamour, darlings. It's carried me far in life, and it can carry you far in life, and if you're so lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective, in the afterlife as well. Yes, darlings. Number 7 is phantom photobombs. Oh, I simply do love to walk down the red carpet of a film premiere as a spirit and sort of photobomb with my indelible ghostly face in the background, and people look and go, what is that? And they see the little orbs and they go, oh, look, orbs, it's angels. No, darling, it's a bunch of assault spirits. Often it's just Charlie Chaplin having a good old time, grabbing people's butts, and they go, oh, who grabbed my butt? It was Charlie Chaplin's spirit, darlings. Oh, yes, very fun, very fun. Number 6. Oh, I'm so grateful for this one. I'm grateful to be living in America. Now, I know a lot of you feel differently in modern times, but let me tell you, America is the country where I grew up in a tar paper shack, and I was able to get out of it and claw and fight and just push with my own will my way to success in Hollywood as a woman with no real education, darlings. With no real education. It's true, I didn't even graduate high school. I had to stop in 7th grade because my mother died and my stepfather was starting to make eyes at me and my younger sister. So we had to run away and take a train to Texas. We had to go from Alabama to Beaumont, Texas, where she took a job as a nanny and I took a job sweeping the floors at one of those dance halls, and I realized quickly that you actually would make a lot more money if you didn't sweep the floors but did the dancing with the men. So here I was, 14 years old, dancing with these lonely, slobbering, sweaty, stinky men. And I saved up all of my pennies until one day a vaudeville troupe came to town and I ran away with them. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my sister Beulah, and she never spoke to me again, darlings. She never did. Even after I was famous and I had all this money and I could help her, she wouldn't speak to me because I had abandoned her. Anyhow, darlings, I traveled with that vaudeville troupe around the country. Sorry, I'm mixing up my words because I'm getting emotional. I traveled around the country with that vaudeville troupe, and once we got to Bakersfield, California, in fact, then I thumbed my way to Hollywood, and I abandoned the vaudeville troupe as well. I did try to send them money, but they wouldn't hear of it, because they remembered the scrawny little, hungry little waif that I was when they first found me. Well, anyway, darlings, I'm grateful that I got out of that tar paper shack, although I'm very regretful about my sister Beulah, and I'm very regretful about my friends in the vaudeville troupe. But I was able to make something of my life, darlings. I was able to do something here, in this country, in this city, Los Angeles, California, that I wouldn't have been able to do had I been born 100 years previous or in another country. And there's even countries today in this world, and this year, 2023, I might be a phantasma, but I still see the news, and I know there are countries where a woman can't go to school, can't become anything she wants. So I'm grateful to be here, darlings. I'm grateful. Number 5, speaking of childhood, I'm grateful for running water, even though I no longer need it. And number 4, speaking of running water, oh, I'm so grateful to be a spirit and no longer have to pee every 2 hours on a long road trip. Now, you may be asking yourself, why, Joan, why don't you have to pee any longer? Well, because I'm a spirit and I'm no longer alive, you dimwit. Many of my bodily functions no longer work. Every once in a while, a little ectoplasm does come out. I don't understand it either. Who knows why? Number 3. Oh, this one is fun. I'm very grateful for my really wonderful, iconic co-stars such as Joseph Cotton, Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, especially if they enjoyed rehearsing after hours, darling, after hours. Number 2, speaking of rehearsing after hours, I'm very grateful for all of my other romantic memories. Oh, particularly with this one particular chic. Oh, and the flamenco dancer we spoke about last episode. Oh, and then there was that pool boy that I hired 3 very, 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 very hot summers in a row. Number 1. Oh, number 1. I'm down to my number 1 thing that I'm most grateful for. Do you know what that is, darlings? It is you. I'm grateful for you, all of my listeners and fans. I'm grateful for you. Are you grateful for me? I'd love to hear from you. Whether you're grateful for me or not, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at joandelafleur@yahoo.com. And now, darlings, if you believe it or not, we've come to the end of another episode of Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience. I've been your host, Joan de la Fleur. In fact, we could say your intrepid host, because I really did have to wait a long time for the revelries of Thanksgiving Eve to end here in this house. And people are still listening to cartoons. I'm sure they're asleep. But darlings, I love you so very much. Please do give this podcast the highest rating possible. Tell all your friends to subscribe. And perhaps we'll see each other next month in another episode of Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience.
This is Gabriel Manro, and you've been listening to Joan de la Fleur, the podcast experience.